Welcome, good morning, and thank you for joining us for this Inenco webinar on meeting the energy and carbon challenge in the NHS. In today's webinar, which will be held in conjunction with Health Estate Journal, the IHE monthly magazine, of which I'm the editor. In the webinar, I'll be putting a number of key questions on the subject of rising energy prices and what NHS healthcare provider organisations and the wider sector can do to mitigate the impact, to Beth Goodwin, Senior Account Manager and NHS Specialist at Energy Management and Sustainability Consultancy in Inenco. In fact, in an article in the latest, that's the May 2022 issue of HEJ, based on a recent interview I conducted with her, Beth touches on this key topic for NHS trusts and also discusses some of Inenco's recent experience helping trusts to formulate and deliver green plans, which is another key focus of our discussion today. With the conflict in the Ukraine resulting in record energy prices and concerns about long-term continuity of supply, and the IPCC's latest report again highlighting the need for urgent action to deliver on our carbon net zero commitments, Inenco says it believes there's never been a more urgent moment for NHS trusts to look afresh at how they can best mitigate rising prices and reduce their energy consumption. In this morning's Q&A format session, Beth will thus focus on how to best mitigate the impact of rising energy prices through an effective procurement strategy, implementing practical energy consumption optimization projects to reduce overall costs, and moving to practical implementation of green plans and to meeting the associated decarbonisation challenge, which we know is very much a focus for trusts at the moment. If at any time during the session, because we have a number of pre-ready questions, you'd like to submit your own question, please submit it via the chat box on your screen, and time allowing, I'll put it to Beth so she can give her view on it. So if we kick off, Beth, thank you very much for taking part with the first question. Just why is there in particular focus on both energy and carbon in the NHS at the moment? What are the main factors behind that?
Yeah, hi Jonathan, and hi everyone. Hi. So yeah, it's I think hot topic on everyone's minds at the moment. You're all probably here because energy and carbon are both falling across your desk on a daily basis, both with increased requests for reports filled in to NHS England, and also just from your senior managers asking about security of supply, asking about what the prices are going to do in future years, and the focus on your green plan and actually getting that implemented. It's on everyone's minds. I think the main reason why the focus is there at the moment is because we've seen that building focus on carbon since 2020 within the NHS, and people are very aware of their targets that they'd set themselves and the need to progress, and the fact that that is a key crucial thing to do within this financial year. But also with energy, it's in the news constantly at the moment. I think most of you have some awareness of what's going on in the market, and I can tell you a little bit more about where we are in the market later, but there's certainly even within the board level an awareness now that the cost of energy for your trust is going to go up, and that almost everyone is impacted, whether that be this year or whether that be in a couple of years' time if you already had a procurement strategy that had procured ahead and has protected you for the short term.
Thank you. So what would you say, in summary, are the top three levers to pull for NHS trusts looking at these goals?
Yeah, I would say the first thing to look at here is really what you're doing to reduce your energy consumption. So it's been a focus from NHS England for a while now in terms of reducing consumption being the first thing to do. And what I would start with is looking at how you can put together some costed business plans for the board on what you can do to reduce energy consumption quickly. And quickly is the operative term here. You really need to be looking at things that you can start to see an impact in the next couple of years. And you also need to be looking at things that will be long term at reducing your consumption and plan that out, how you're going to do it, phased plans. You'll need to measure those, make sure that you're measuring and sort of verifying that you're getting results from your projects. And if you've got guarantees of those results from your project from the sort of people that you're buying things from, make sure that you're going back to them and challenging them if they're not performing. The second thing I would say is look at your procurement strategies. I think within the NHS, there are some trusts who've been very proactive in terms of energy procurement and have been looking at this and talking to people about what their views are and what they want as a trust for a number of years. There are others where you've generally just gone with whatever you've been on historically, and it's never been a huge risk. You would have seen variation in prices, but you only would have seen variation in prices of maybe £10 megawatt hour on electricity before, whereas now we're seeing swings of hundreds. So it's a huge change to the impact that this can have. And what I would suggest is that you start to get a group of people together to sit down and talk about how you want to procure your energy, your risk profile as a trust, what's most important to you. If there's a limit of what you can pay, what that is, and how you can put that in place, and what you can do to make sure that that's protected in a rising market. Or if there's actually, it's not about a limit, it's about making sure that you try and achieve the best price you can, looking at how you can do that and how you can go about it. And what I'd suggest is talk to the experts. That's not just us. Talk to a number of people, talk to people about how you can do this and what different strategies are available in the market, and work out what works best for you. We have a number of options. Different trusts do different things within our baskets, and I know that that's the case elsewhere as well. So talk to people and start to put together your view as a committee for your trust. And finally, sorry, Jonathan, I know I'm waffling a little bit on this one.
No, not at all.
It's focus on your green plan and essentially just planning out steps. So with decarbonisation, you need to make sure that you're doing this in a logical way, looking for things that are both cost and carbon positive to begin with, that are going to be a benefit on both, but also being aware of when you're going to have large capex costs, because these will be there with your green plan, and just planning those in and making sure that the trusts are aware of when you're going to need to do those.
Thank you. Some very good and salient advice there. Can we focus on the net zero challenge in particular? Most of our listeners, and indeed many outside healthcare, will have an awareness of net zero and the UK's targets. But could you describe briefly what are the NHS's net zero objectives and where the green plans fit into this, for, particularly for those who are less au fait with them?
Yeah, of course. So I think most of you are probably aware that the NHS defines carbon footprint a little differently to private sector organisations. We've done a few talks around that before. So I'll go over the NHS carbon footprint and what that is in a minute. But your targets are to reach net zero by 2040 for the NHS carbon footprint. And you should be trying to reach 80% reduction by 2028 to 2032. That's really not long away. And an 80% reduction is a significant reduction. It's going to require a lot of work if you're going to hit that target. So you do need to start acting straight away. And then you've also got a target for any emissions you can influence, and that's everything you're buying, really, everything that you're buying from other suppliers, that you're going to reach net zero by 2045. And that's incredibly ambitious. And there are things being put in place centrally to help you with that and to help you hold suppliers like us to account and make sure that you're working with the right people. But it will be something, again, that is going to be a significant challenge. So you almost need two work streams on this. You need a work stream within procurement looking at the net zero for the carbon footprint plus, and you need a work stream that is focused on the carbon footprint. Where that all fits in with green plans is a little bit more difficult, because green plans are a little bit broader. So they are focused on carbon, but they're also focused on other things. So the green plan should be looking at being a sustainable healthcare organisation, which is a bit of a broader scope than a carbon footprint. And I can go into a bit more detail on that later.
Thank you. I know from talking to you and the article we've already published in HEJ on the subject, that in your work with trusts in developing green plans, there's been quite a number of different approaches, and trusts are obviously at very different stages with this. What do you think have been some of the main challenges for the NHS trusts that you've dealt with in developing their green plans, given the very wide range of activities that need to be covered?
Yeah, I think understanding within the organisation is the main challenge, because historically, carbon and the responsibility for carbon, and therefore sustainability, would sit within estates, and it would have sat within the estates under the energy manager almost always. A number of trusts now have sustainability managers, as well as energy managers, and that's been a huge help. But with the green plan, you need to touch every area of your trust. And it's been very challenging, I think, for people because they've had to go through an education piece, for people within, say, their procurement teams and people within their risk teams looking at adaptation, to understand that actually they are integral to this as well, and they will have ownership of some of these things that they need to do. I would say that's been the main challenge, is getting engagement from those other areas of a trust.
Interesting. What have you observed as some of the good and best practice or opportunities in some trusts that others might perhaps look to adopt?
Yeah, this is it's something I've talked about quite a lot here, is sharing good practice. And I would encourage anyone who's on this call who hasn't yet published your green plan publicly. It is something that you would be asked to look at anyway. And I would really encourage you to do that, because sharing the good practice that you've got within that green plan is going to help other trusts. It's something that I saw across the board. Every trust I worked with who was looking at their green plan, there was someone in a department somewhere that was doing something already that we didn't know about, that other people in the trust weren't aware of and didn't know was actually best practice. So we've seen some great examples of, sort of during COVID, of kit houses, net zero kit houses being put on site for nurses to live on site at particular trusts. We've seen examples of robotic cleaners that have been working for a significant amount of time. And we've seen all of this good practice that came around actually how to implement remote care, as well, which was done with no thought about really carbon or the impact on sustainable healthcare, but actually now can be worked back and embedded into a sustainable healthcare strategy and into a green plan.
That's all very interesting. I mean, given the very wide range of expertise out in the NHS and in NHS healthcare engineering and state management departments, there must be lots of opportunities for sharing of expertise here and sharing expertise with the commercial sector. So interesting to hear. A different question, given the focus on consolidating a green plan at ICS level with the new ICSs, where do you think there are maybe opportunities for multi-agency working?
Yeah, this is great. So the ICS green plans, I'm eagerly awaiting seeing some of these, and seeing these come out, where they've actually worked to consolidate everything across a number of trusts, to understand where you all are, and which ones are excelling in different things. I think this gives a great opportunity actually, where you can start to communicate what the NHS is doing in a local region to the council and to local education sector. And you can start to rebuild those links. Now, some of you already have these, some of you work very closely with these organisations already. And if you don't, it's definitely something that's worth doing, is getting those groups together, not just with the NHS in your local region, but also with other key players in your local region. That might also include some private sector organisations, depending on where you are, who might be key players. But you will definitely want to reach out to local universities if you have them, and to your council. Your council are going to be crucial in your heat decarbonisation and how you're going to take that forward. So talking to them about your goals is really a great start.
Interesting. We'll go back to energy and carbon. Green plans also have quite a big focus on biodiversity, I believe. What would you see as some of the opportunities there? Because I believe there are some trusts that, you know, with reasonable amount of green space that perhaps they could be exploiting better.
Yeah, this is one that I think is missed quite a lot. It's not specifically a section within your green plan. It would fall under your estates. But when COP26 was going on last year in November, there was an open letter written to the NHS by Saeed Javid. And I'm just going to read a couple of segments from it here, because I think that people may not have seen this. And I think it's crucial to have some awareness of the focus that's going to be on biodiversity. So this is just verbatim from the letter. It says, our work on net zero is supported by a broad range of action on wider environmental policy, including the forthcoming Environment Bill. The bill will set a legally binding target to halt the decline in species abundance by 2030, putting the environment at the centre of all government policy making. This will require all public bodies, including NHS England, to report publicly on their impact on key environmental outcomes. And what he focuses on later is that he talks about the fact that NHS organisations in England occupy 25 million metres squared of land, and that's in acute care alone. And that's bringing direct responsibilities with major issues like biodiversity, air quality, waste reduction, and water quality. And this is your green plan. So what he's talking about here, all of these things should be mentioned, should be discussed within your green plan. And he's just bringing that focus back to the fact that it's wider than carbon. Now, with biodiversity, it's something you might not have thought about. You will have been doing work on your green spaces anyway, I'm sure, to make them accessible and to make them attractive places for patients to spend time. But actually, some of the things that you could be doing, reaching out to local colleges, reaching out to local universities again, seeing if they want to use your sites to baseline biodiversity and to try and improve it. They may want to come and do that, and they may be very grateful for the opportunity to have a long-term study. But also just being aware of the fact that planting for biodiversity may be key going forwards.
That's interesting. I'm hearing about some good examples of that sort of work in HEJ, and I know you've touched on that. Back to carbon again. One of the biggest areas of contention, where there obviously is scope for improvement, seems to be around anaesthetic gases. Some of which I know have a high greenhouse warming potential. What are some of the challenges or best practices that you're seeing there? Because I believe there have been some interesting ones.
There have, yeah. So I think the key thing here is around education and communication again, because there are different trusts who've made different levels of progress on reducing the levels of emissions from their anaesthetic gases. And it seems to not actually follow much of a pattern in terms of any sort of usage of these and what you're doing. What it tends to be is actually towards how much communication there has been with your anaesthetists and how aware they are of the impact of the drugs that they're using. So that's great, and we have seen some who are actually looking to completely stop purchasing the worst of these gases, which is incredible to already be there. You'll see it in your standard contract. If you open up the NHS standard contract, you will see the targets around anaesthetic gases. They are key targets and they are hard targets to hit if you've not begun it already. So you will need to look at these. I would say the biggest challenge I see here is the inclusion of NOx reporting. So emissions from NOx haven't previously been captured, they haven't previously been recorded, and that is going to be a significant impact for those of you who've got large maternity wards. So you will want to start tracking that, and looking to reduce it is going to be difficult. The initial guidance is mostly around reducing leaks, but we have seen some great examples of testing of other options to try and reduce the emissions from NOx. But I think that's going to be the biggest challenge from my perspective, because we don't see an easy alternative to move to.
Is this an area of technology that's more advanced in other European countries, do you know, reducing this, or is it something that's particular to the UK?
I think it's a global issue, to be honest. This is something that the NHS is trying to lead the way in reducing carbon impact. Now, different regions, different countries use different gases, mostly due to preference and what marketing went on in those areas. That you can even see that within the UK. So you can see that actually, if you look over to the Norfolk sort of region, there's a huge amount of people that are using isoflurane. Sorry if I've got that wrong. I'm trying to do it from memory, rather than desflurane and sevoflurane. And that's because that was successful in that region when it came out and was marketed to people. So you'll see it everywhere, and certainly, yes, globally, there will be certain countries that have lower emissions and certain countries that have higher emissions, mostly by chance.
Thank you. On a slightly different subject, some trusts also seem to be focusing more than others on how to embrace telehealth or more localised treatment initiatives. Have you seen much experience of this? Obviously, it's quite a difficult balancing act and has considerable, or will have considerable, estates and facilities management implications in the future. But presumably, if you can reduce the number of patient journeys, you can make a considerable difference.
Yeah, so patients travelling onto site and patients being on site and using resources whilst they're there are both sort of key areas that you can improve from using telehealth. Now, I think with telehealth, we went incredibly quickly during COVID. People moved to remote systems very fast and not necessarily through what the NHS usually would take as a governance approach to deciding whether this was the best practice going forwards. But we didn't see negative impacts in most cases. And I know really, whilst we've seen some of this slip back to in-person care, there needs to be a sort of assessment of whether that's necessary, whether there are certain circumstances where, yes, you do need to have a more hands-on approach, and whether telehealth can actually become as successful as it was temporarily during COVID in the long term. It has to mean that there is no detriment to care. And that's the difficult part to prove, which during COVID wasn't necessarily the highest priority. Whereas now I know some trusts have seen a slip back in telehealth just because they want to make sure that there wasn't any impact on the quality of care.
That's very interesting. I think you know, a number of people and patients have got used to telehealth and teleconsultations, and there's e-consult options whereby you can fill in information, send it to the doctor, and they will call you back or have a chat with you. Do you think there's more scope for sort of putting health facilities into high streets, which is one of the models that's been emerging recently? I know, for instance, that one recently went into a former Beals department store in Poole, with, I think, the Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group. Do you think we're going to see more of that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So I do think we'll see more of that kind of thing. I also am expecting to see a much higher quantity of the remote vans. We have them in Leeds, which is where I am. We see every so often parked up at the local supermarket, a large sort of lorry, essentially, which is offering healthcare options to people within their local community in an area that they would go to anyway. I think that is going to be crucial going forwards, that level of integration. But also I'm expecting to see more acute facilities actually using their local community sites. So where there is some underutilized office space, for example, within a community site, that they might have a local clinic there once a month, once a week, depending on the need in the community, to actually be able to bring some of their services off of the main site and much more local to people.
That's interesting. I think, again, on sort of estates and facilities and equipment, presumably the sort of aging infrastructure of the NHS and lots of acute hospital sites is going to be a key challenge with trusts trying to meet green plans, especially as some of the plants and equipment in some of the older hospitals may now be quite old.
Yeah, I think it's probably the main challenge. I think we understate how difficult this is going to be sometimes. And when you speak to the people within estates teams and they're looking at their estate strategies and they're talking about how to keep a building going, whether they should keep a building going, or whether a new building is required, and how they can make that a net zero building. It's a big challenge, certainly. The fact is, we are going to have to work with what we have for most trusts. There isn't an option to just move out of all of the aged infrastructure and into bespoke new build hospitals across the whole of the UK. We will have to use what we've got, which means we do need to start working on deep retro audits and looking at what you can do within the existing infrastructure to bring it to be the most efficient and the best from a care perspective that it can be as well.
We've already seen a growing and considerable switch, which, given the infrastructure necessary, one would hope will increase in the automotive market. What opportunities do you think the adoption of hydrogen technology might present to the NHS, and what are the major barriers? Is it mainly about cost at the moment or lack of capacity?
Hydrogen's a really interesting one, and this is a question that we get asked a lot. There's been a lot of interest in hydrogen within the NHS as a potential to be able to continue operating as normal, because the idea of being able to use green hydrogen and just put it into a CHP set and keep your existing infrastructure is very attractive to a large acute hospital. Now, the reality is that within the UK, we have very limited supply of green hydrogen. There's very little at all. Even within blue hydrogen, which still has a carbon impact, there's very limited available. And what we see is likely is that actually hydrogen will be useful within transport, as you say. We'll see hydrogen fuel cell cars, ambulances. We'll see that as a backup system potentially for electric ambulances. And we probably will see it in very niche applications where you require high temperatures. So you might see it in autoclave facilities, or some level of facility where you require a very high temperature. You will potentially see it in industry where they have to have a fuel that can achieve an incredibly high temperature. I don't expect to see it coming in as a heating option for the NHS, certainly not within the timescales of the 2040 net zero target.
Thanks, that's an interesting answer. Is this, on a related subject, is there sufficient renewable generation capacity at the moment to meet the NHS's needs? Is this a big issue?
It is. Some people on the call will probably have been hit with dramatically increased REGO costs this year. So obviously you moved to a REGO-backed electricity supply as part of the standard terms and conditions a number of years ago now. And that's something that you'll be seeing a cost every year for that. The REGO system is essentially a certification system that says that somewhere in the UK or in Europe, depending on how the REGOs are looked at, someone with a renewable generation has generated the electricity that you're using. It doesn't mean that's the electricity you're actually using. It's a certificate that is purchased from a generation source and goes into yours, is allocated against you. Now, there is sufficient renewable generation to meet the NHS's needs. The problem here is that the NHS aren't the only people who need it. And the demand within the private sector is also significantly higher. The demand across Europe is significantly higher. And actually, we saw REGO prices shoot up last year. And people will have seen a significant increase in cost if they hadn't already procured these. We've also seen that the costs have been much higher with suppliers where their fuel mix isn't very green. So every supplier in the UK has to publish what they actually purchase in terms of fuel. So you can look up on your supplier's website how much of their actual supply is from renewable generation, what percentage. So you can see what they're actually buying, whether they're buying from a gas generator, whether they're buying from wind farms, whether they're buying from biomass, whether they're buying from nuclear. And what we saw is the generators who actually are, say, more than 90% renewable with their supply, where they're buying from renewable generation sources, their REGO costs didn't go up significantly because they buy them with the electricity. But where you're with suppliers who actually don't buy any renewable supply or very limited renewable supply and don't have enough to cover their NHS clients' needs, those costs skyrocketed. And they skyrocketed because the open market for those certificates, where you're not buying them with the electricity, was through the roof. And this is something that you're going to need to look at going forwards. What I want to touch on here is the flaws within this system. In that actually the NHS wants to show additionality when you're buying your electricity. So additionality, you can look at the supplier fuel mix, because actually if you're moving to a supplier who is significantly renewable, you are putting a pressure on the grid to green. But we don't have a definition yet as to what additionality means for NHS England. And the only way that you could actually guarantee additionality would meet any criteria set would be to look at PPAs. And this is private purchase agreements. So you would go off and you would essentially have an agreement with a generation source, probably via a supplier, because those are much simpler. And what you would do here is you would sign a long-term agreement to buy their actual electricity, and the certificates would come to you directly from that as well. The reason PPAs are different is because you can go out to market and look for a generator that doesn't exist yet. So you can actually specifically say, I want to fund the creation of this generation asset, and that's how you get the additionality. So a PPA on its own doesn't tick the box either. You have to actually be looking for that additionality at the time. And what you're doing is you're going out to be the anchor to allow them to get their funding to be built. So yeah, I would say that's the best way to look at it, is actually the NHS doesn't need to know whether there is sufficient renewable generation capacity for it and the private sector. What they want you to do is actually look at creating it. and making sure that you're having a benefit to how green the grid is by putting a pressure on to increase how much renewable generation capacity there is in the UK.
Given the size of the NHS and scale, you'd think that would be a strong driver. Another question has just come in. It's going back to green plans. How much enthusiasm have you seen generally, or alternatively resistance within trust for green plan implementation? I mean, presumably estates and facilities people, particularly because of their background, and healthcare engineering personnel will inherently, they'll see the rationale for it. But has it been a real challenge for some trusts to get staff on board?
This is an interesting one, because a number of energy managers in the NHS have been banging on about this for years, and I'll use their phrasing because that's how they would put it to me. And it's felt to them maybe like they've been hitting a door, knocking on a door, trying to get this message across for years. And then all of a sudden, someone's opened the door, tried to pull them through it, and said, you should have done this ages ago, and this is what I need you to do, and I need you to do it all at once, on top of their normal day-to-day work, which is a challenge. The enthusiasm is there, the time and the resource isn't always there. And for green plan implementation, what I've seen is there's a lot of keenness to start moving forward with things, but there is a growing frustration in the amount of time that's taking. And that's where allocating owners in other parts of the trust to get them to take ownership of the actions, get their time allocated to this and costed to this, and the approval from their management that they will spend time on implementing tasks that are not part of their normal job. That actual sort of logistics in the background is the challenge that people are facing. Building the structure and the governance structures and making sure that time is allocated for individuals across many departments to actually work on this and focus on this. That comes with a cost, and that cost has to be approved. So there has been an element of things slowing down, or at least that's what I've seen, because people are struggling to jump through the hoops to make sure that things actually happen now that the Green Plan is published.
Thanks. I mean, one would hope that given the importance of this agenda to the UK as a whole, that this might be an area where estates and facilities people, senior people and management in that area might be able to get the ear of board and management personnel because of the importance of it. And I know that's something that sometimes they struggle to do on estates and facilities matters, because obviously the clinical priorities tend to be put first.
Yeah, the board definitely, in most places, the board sort of green lead has been quite engaged. I think the problem comes in the disconnect, in that if you've got someone from the estates department going to board, board can then come back down and say, yes, we want this to happen. But there might be 3 or 4 management levels that need to be involved that are actually in other departments that are obviously below board, not linked to estates. So it's down then to that board green lead to try and make that happen through the management chain. And that's not always the quickest thing. And actually, when you've got the governance structures coming together and collaborative approach, committees from a number of different departments, if you can get the managers from those departments engaged and then they go away and say, yes, I'm going to give this time to my team, rather than going above their heads and forcing them, that seems to be having more of an impact.
Thank you. There's also been more talk recently around adaptation plans in the context of climate risk. In your experience, are trusts addressing this area effectively at present?
I would say most trusts that I've talked to would say that they know that they don't have a clear view of what they're going to do around adaptation right now. It's something that came up during the Green Plan work, because of course this is a whole section within your Green Plan on adaptation and what you've got already. And it's not necessarily always been thought about. There's been a view that external consultants, when they're designing new builds or refurbishment projects, will consider climate risk as part of that process, and therefore it sits within that external construction chain rather than within the trust in some areas. Some climate risks are covered just from the normal risk management processes, but really the long-term planning around it, I think most trusts are aware that they've not really done that historically. and looking at your flood risk for all of your buildings, understanding which of your buildings are going to be at risk of overheating and whether you need more cooling systems, whether your local communities that actually use your services are going to be in situ, or if the local area is at risk of flooding, and things may actually have to move completely. And just having those plans in place is going to take a little bit of time, but it is one of the top priorities. And I know most people that I've seen have set this as a target for within the first couple of years of their green plan, is to get to the point where they have a climate risk assessment and they have an adaptation plan for the trust as a whole. And then you can build that in, if you've got multiple sites, you can build that into sort of an overview of an assessment of your sites and which sites are strategic and are going to be your long-term sites and which ones may actually need to be moved out of long-term.
Thanks, Beth. Very, very good and sensible advice. And there must be a lot of lessons that can be learned from experiences in other countries that have been prone to particular climate disasters, thinking about Japan, for instance, and the impact of some of the things that have happened there on healthcare. But it's obviously going to be a much wider issue in future. Going back, another question is, one of the advantages of current high energy prices is that it encourages a greater focus on consumption reduction. How are some of your NHS Trust and other clients addressing this? You have touched on this, but I'd be interested in what you can say on that.
Yeah, I think it's something that people are starting to be very savvy about this. So where you've got high energy prices, people are looking to put this on a risk register. They're having conversations already about what the energy cost will be in a number of years. And that awareness is building within the trust, within finance teams, within procurement teams, that this is something that is going to happen. Because that awareness is there and some of these people sit at the board level, it's making it much easier for people to actually talk about needing capital funding for consumption reduction projects. Where previously it's been difficult to secure this, difficult to unlock it because the priority has been other things, reducing your risk register. Now, if you're looking at consumption reduction projects, and you can tie these up so that they do align with reducing your risk register, you are getting more of a focus on that, and people do seem more engaged with actually delivering them. And that's both short-term and long-term, because the actual value in doing it, the payback periods right now, looking at the energy prices that people are experiencing, are very fast.
Thank you. A question on the subject of energy, but from somebody, one of the audience members, who says, it's Paul Todd is the gentleman's name. We're in a position where we've done some development work on equipment which uses considerably less energy to do the same job, but he says it's in a sphere which isn't known for making energy savings and is both awkward and critical. It's medical gas pipelines. Which people should we be talking to try to help people realise these benefits and get these goals into the market?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, this is great actually, because the NHS should be encouraging suppliers to be doing this, should be encouraging this kind of work from the marketplace. It is challenging to find the right person. What I would encourage you to do is to reach out to your local NHS trusts. The people that you want to talk to really initially probably are the energy managers, because they'll know who to send you to, and it varies from organisation to organisation. But also, if you proactively contact the procurement teams right now should have more awareness of looking for these kinds of benefits and carbon benefits. And they may also be able to pass you on to the people clinically that need to approve this kind of product and this kind of work. There is a huge focus on reducing emissions from gas pipelines at the moment. It really is something that is needed and is being focused on. It's just going to be getting to the right person. If you find you're getting nowhere, I would reach out to board sustainability leads. They should be publicly available, their sort of information on trust websites. You can find out who the board sustainability lead is, or go centrally and see if you can talk to the NHS England central team to talk about whether they can actually introduce you to anyone.
That's great. I would also blow in our own trumpet, say that if anybody's working on anything innovative in this area, then please share it with me at Health Estate Journal, because I'd be interested to hear about it, and it's another way to reach the intended audience. Just as we come to a close, in our final section, can we focus on perhaps the most immediate pressing problem of the increases in energy prices? What's happening in the energy market at present, Beth, and what have you seen as the impact on trusts? Because I know you've been focusing an awful lot of time, understandably, on this in recent weeks.
I have. Let me just, I'll just put my screen up, and what I'll show you is our most recent daily market report. So can you see that at the moment, Jonathan?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Screen. Excellent. So this is today's. We do a daily market report every day, and we find that these are really useful for people, for our clients, just to get an overview of what's happening in the market. It's very high level. Sorry, it doesn't go into a huge amount of detail. It just gives you a snippet of what the current prices are in different periods and different types of things. So if you look, this is the natural gas side, and you can see on the left here what's going on with the graphs. So on your, apologies, let's see if I can get it to scroll down. There we are. So if you have a look at this, you can see the graphs on the left here. You've got the day ahead and the month ahead. So that's the green is day ahead and the blue is month ahead. And then on the graph below it, you've got winter 22 and summer 23. And this is the different seasons. So you can see that actually the seasons that are closest are most impacted when there's a spike due to something happening. So you can see that on the month ahead and day ahead, where we had this big spike that came all the way up to 505 pence a therm, which was in sort of April, late February, start of March. You can see that hugely impacted winter 22, which is the next season, but it didn't impact summer 23 as much. So you sort of see this ripple effect where actually the seasons that are further out are less impacted by current events. What you will see here is that recently the day ahead and the month ahead have been coming down. The reason they've been coming down is because the risk of Russia immediately cutting off gas to Europe has been seen to be de-risking. So we're seeing the prices have been coming down on the prompt day ahead. Now, that's not to say that prompt day ahead has performed better, because actually you're looking at averaging these prices with your consumption over the whole period. So you actually will probably see that people who've got close term purchasing have still not performed very well over this period. When you look at the seasonal curve, they're not falling off. And this is something we're seeing in future years. And you can see sort of over on the right here, we've got summer 24, summer 25 are also shown. And those are the prices for those are lower further out because the risk of the war is being reduced. However, they are increasing, not decreasing, and they're moving in this sideways motion with this sort of variability, but bouncing around between lines. So what we're seeing with that, and the electricity mirrors this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back off screen and just come back to talking to you about it, because graphs are great, but they are a little technical. So what you'll find is that we're seeing that these increased energy prices, even out to April 26 period, summer 26 period, we're seeing prices around £100 megawatt hour for electricity, around 100 pence a therm for gas. And those were unprecedented previously. So you will have previously been receiving prices hopefully around the 40 to 50 pence a therm, pounds a megawatt hour for your gas and electricity. So it's a double. It's a doubling of the commodity part of your energy cost. Commodity isn't all of your energy costs. There's a lot of taxes and levies that are also added on top of that on electricity and on gas, which is increasing as well. So everyone knows that these increases are happening and what's happening in the energy market. The worry at the moment is that it's becoming long-term. It's not a short-term thing anymore. This isn't something that's going away in the next year. And we're starting to see that it's likely that this market is going to continue to be high, which means that this is going to be a cost pressure, and it is going to be a cost pressure that even trusts who procured ahead, who've avoided it immediately being a problem, are likely to see. So the impact on trusts is essentially actually in some cases this year, where people didn't have long-term procurement, a doubling of their energy spend from last year to this year, which was not forecast for most of those trusts and has just had to be found. And that will have an impact on other areas of the trust spending. It will have an impact on whether the trust is meeting its obligations, because that's a cost pressure that won't have been forecast. So procuring energy well going forwards and reducing your consumption as much as you possibly can so that you've not got that cost um, is going to be crucial for you to be able to try and reduce what that cost pressure is going to be going forwards. And it's crucial for the board to make sure that actually there's no impact on spend that can be done elsewhere.
Do you have any sort of foresight or idea of what might happen in the sort of shorter to medium term future on prices, or is it very difficult to predict at the minute?
It is difficult to predict. Everything comes with a caveat. This is a global market and anything can happen. However, the pricing in sort of April period 23 is incredibly high at the moment. So if I just nip back into this and just grab you a figure. So the price for the summer 23 is currently at 173 pence therm. And bear in mind that previously you'd be looking around 40.
Gosh,
It's an
very
incredibly
much increase.
yeah, it's an incredibly large increase. So you are looking at this as something that is going to be a significant challenge.
Thank you. A couple of other questions we've had from the audience. One's from Ian France, who says, in order to reduce carbon by what Ian describes as an enormous 80%, would you have any particular guidance on how much is feasible to achieve by reducing demand and how much you need to achieve from low carbon generation?
Yeah, there's going to be a mix here in terms of what you need to do. Reducing demand is your first step because it comes with cost savings. You're not going to hit 80% just by reducing demand. You just simply aren't. You will need to be looking at moving to a low carbon, sort of no carbon electricity source. And that will be something that you'll need to be able to show that there's additionality. I'm hoping there's going to be some guidance from this from NHS England in what they'll require of you in order to be allowed to declare your emissions from electricity net zero, because that will help a number of trusts get significantly closer to this 80% reduction target. Where you're looking at then moving is it's moving away from gas, because gas is the area where you cannot realistically move to a lower carbon option. There isn't very much available. There are RGGOs, which are the equivalent to REGOs, but they're very limited and their cost is incredibly high. So it's not something we expect is going to become part of this picture. What we expect is you're going to be asked to shift as much as you can your heating from gas to electricity once you have a zero carbon electricity supply in place. So that is going to be the long-term view of it. And by 2032, you will probably have needed to have started on that journey and made significant progress on at least one of your sites in order to hit the 80% goal.
So now is very much the time to be thinking about this.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Now is when you should be planning. And there is funding available now. PSDS, a number of people have had funding to do heat decarbonisation planning, and that's something that I would encourage people to keep an eye out for, whether there's some more of that, because that kind of grant funding where you can get external consultancy in to actually plan and help you to look at what you can do on your sites. If you can get that as a grant, that's going to be incredibly useful for you, and then you can work to build on it and build it into your estates plans.
In fact, there'll be an article about a major heat decarbonisation scheme at North Tyneside Hospital in North Shields, which will cover just this area in the June HEJ. So hopefully that will provide some interesting information and insight into what they've done. One other question, do you have any comments on how the NHS might think more about buying products made with recyclable materials? Presumably where in instances, there are instances where this is being done already. That question comes from Ambrose Kingston.
Yeah, there are trusts that are further ahead. There are trusts that aren't so far ahead on this kind of thing. Recyclable materials and reusable kit as well, things that can be actually sent off to be cleaned and then repurposed and brought back. These are things that we absolutely see procurement teams need to be thinking about. And really the way forward on this is to try and encourage it within your tenders and within your procurement, when procurement are going out and talking to suppliers, to ask them, whether they have any alternatives which are more recyclable, that are less carbon intensive, and to encourage that kind of input. The work around the 10% for essentially sustainability and the local environment and that kind of thing that's going into tenders at the moment, it is key, but actually I'd encourage people to actually explicitly ask. So if you're buying a product that you're aware that there are recyclable material alternatives out there, it should go out in your tender as what percentage of recyclable materials are used within this product. How do we actually go about waste disposal for this product? Do you know? And the next step after that, which is a long way down the NHS sort of supply chain plan, is to ask for actually what is the life cycle cost of your product. And you can start down that route already. You can start having those conversations with suppliers to ask, what do you know about the actual carbon impact of the waste disposal of your product? And if they don't know anything, that's fine, but they can go away and they can start to say, actually, this is something we're asked about. We should maybe spend some money finding it out.
Yeah, there must be a great deal of opportunity for suppliers to promote further innovation in this area, a big and interesting area. Thank you very much. That was some very interesting insight. Unless there are any questions, I think I've put most of the questions we had to Beth. I must say it's been a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for your very expert and lucid insight into a subject which must be exercising the minds of all estates and facilities departments at the moment. Actually, there is another question's come in. What difference have NHS trusts encountered in the challenge faced with the decarbonisation? I'm just trying to see if I can see that question. The decarbonisation of heating as compared to other thermal needs such as hot water, sterilisation and so on, where temperatures and variations in load are often much greater.
Yeah, so you will have noticed I mentioned essentially sterilisation earlier as a potential area where hydrogen may actually come to NHS so that you can hit these high temperatures. Where you're looking at decarbonisation of heating, absolutely, air source heat pumps run at a lower temperature generally to the systems that are currently in place within trusts. Now you can get boosted air source heat pump systems. You can get air source heat pump systems that will reach a 60 degree. You can't get them where they'll reach hotter than that realistically, and it's inefficient the higher the temperature that you try and get them to do. So they can do hot water. However, what I've seen from most people is that where you're looking at moving to air source heat pump rather than gas-fired heating, when it comes to hot water, you are looking at some form of electrical boost. So you are looking essentially at point of use, additional heat to ensure that your hot water is at the temperature that it should be within local areas, within your clarifiers. It is an engineering challenge, this one. It's something you should be talking to people about when you're looking at heat decarbonisation, because obviously you're used to, some of you, having steam, which obviously is significantly higher temperature than you're going to have systems available to deliver in future. Sterilisation, I think, is the easier part of this, because you can look at doing this as individual areas. And because they're quite self-contained, you can actually put in place either direct electrical heating, or you can look at some form of gas-fired sterilisation for those small areas, which then you can phase out longer term. Hot water, looking at electric point of use is probably the way forward, looking at electric boosts within clarifiers. And when you're looking at your actual heating system, one of the things not mentioned here, but probably is going to be key on everyone's mind, is delivery of heat and how you're delivering heat, whether it's through a wet system or whether it is actually through your air system. And these are all things you need to talk to someone about. Heat decarbonisation plan. How is that going to work for your site? And individual buildings, you're going to want to look at what those challenges are going to be. So very complicated question there, Stephen, but thank you for it.
Thanks on that note, Beth, for participating in a very interesting discussion, and you had questions on a pretty wide range of subjects. Thank you for answering them in such an expert way. We hope that viewers have found it informative, and for those asking if there will be a recording of the webinar available after today, there will indeed be. On that note, because I think we've exhausted the questions we have, I'd like to thank Beth very much for taking part on behalf of Enenco, for answering the questions. And it was a very interesting discussion from my point of view, I must say as well. Thank you also to our audience for listening. We had a good attendance and hope you find it useful and interesting. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Beth. Bye.